Hi there, it's Tracy Kiernan, and this acrylic painting tutorial is going to show you how to paint Cathedral Rock Sedona with acrylics on an 11 by 14 inch canvas. So we're going to do a little bit of a challenge painting with these canyons, and I will guide you step by step. Let's go over colors and brushes. We're going to use a 3/4 inch flat wash, a number 12 bright brush, which is like a 1/2 inch flat brush, a number 3/8 inch angle brush, which is optional but might be helpful to get some of these angles and lines, horizontal lines in the canyon, and a number 4 round brush. So the brushes with the red handles, those are Princeton Velvet Touch brushes. Also a number 8 long round brush, which I like this brush because it has a really fine point to it, and that's going to be helpful when we do the spikes on the cactus. Let's go over colors. There are, I believe, 9 colors in this one. Mars Black and Titanium White, usually staple colors in almost every painting. Red Oxide and Yellow Oxide are very important colors, so we're going to use those colors to kind of mix and get those different tones of red and orange in our Sedona rocks. The primary blue and light blue permanent are going to be used in the sky and the water. And then we have some primary colors, Hooker's Green Hue, primary yellow, and Quinacridone Magenta, which will be used in the prickly pear fruit on the cactus. There is an optional template for this that you can use to help with the drawing portion. If you're drawing this with me, you'll need a ruler, pencil, and a chalk for later when we do the cactus drawing. So let's go ahead and get started. You'll need a pencil and a ruler, and the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to start with our canvas going vertically, and we're going to do our horizon line. I have also my rough draft on the left, which I did on a little 8 by 10 canvas paper. I do a lot of my rough drafts on these, and when I do rough drafts, they're usually messy and more expressive because my goal is to kind of get the design down and get all the colors figured out before I really focus on technique. So that's my rough draft, my idea. And then I have a reference photo here of the canyon. The reference photo is super important in this one because of the unique shape of the canyon. We're going to really focus on that and try to get the shape to really kind of mimic what Cathedral Rock looks like in Sedona. And I love the reflection of this canyon over Oak Creek. So we're going to try to do a simplistic form of that reflection. So this horizon line is, we're going to put this right in the center of the canvas. So I have my canvas going vertically, and my it's 14 inch high, so I'm measuring 7 inches. So if you're doing like a 16 by 20 canvas, you'd measure 10 inches, whatever the halfway point of your canvas is. Mark your lines. I usually, if I'm not using a T-square, I'll do like 3 points and then do my horizontal line. If you're using the traceable template, you would just trace it on the blank white canvas and use graphite paper to trace your lines, including that horizon line, which is so important for landscape paintings. And let's take a look at our reference photo. I have a reference photo for you in the PDF instruction part, but we want to try to replicate the shape of this canyon. So if we look at it, we're going to start on the left side. We're going to start above our horizon line, and I'm going to do very short little tick mark types of strokes, of drawing strokes, just because I really want to rough in the shape of this canyon. So the canyon on the left is kind of a wider and kind of rounded at the top. And then we have 2 narrow shaped rock formations in the center. They're going vertically, but they're narrow. This one's a little bit wider than the one on the right, and it's got kind of an angled top. And then this one's more narrow, the smaller kind of angled top. So if you are looking at the reference photo and drawing this with me, I recommend you look more at the photo than you're drawing. So this one right here, this canyon is about the same height as the one on the far right, and it's also wide. And we're gonna actually just make this one go off the side of the canvas so we don't see all of it on the right. But look at your reference photo more than your canvas that you're drawing on, and that really helps to kind of train your eye to draw what you see and not what you think you see. It's a good technique. And then drawing very lightly. So I'm going to go back into this one. So our canyons have some layers, and this is going to help us later when we paint some of the shadows. I'm going to do a few kind of vertical lines on the inside of these canyons, and these lines just kind of go down and then they kind of curve to the right, but they don't go all the way down to the horizon line. So this is that other layer in front of this canyon. So you curve it down and then go towards the right. I'm going to do a vertical line right here, down, curve to the right. This one vertical down, and then let it kind of drift to the right. So that helps you create layers in your canyons. And this will be helpful when we add shadowing in here later. Just a few vertical lines in these thin ones as well. On the base of the canyons in this landscape painting, we're going to have some greenery down here where the trees are. Our reference photo has larger trees, but we're going to make them smaller so they're not covering too much of the canyon. And then I'm going to draw this kind of wavy loose line on the bottom where our prickly pear cactus and yellow yucca will be living. And I'm not going to draw the cactus, I'll draw that later when we fill in the water. And that's it for the drawing portion for now. The only other drawing we'll do later is with a piece of chalk, and we'll draw our cactus and plant in, but that's not until way later. We are ready to start painting this in. So I'm going to get my water cup ready, my paint palette, and I need the color, or we need to use the color light blue permanent and titanium white. So that's going to be the color of our sky. And we'll be using a 3/4 inch flat wash brush. So load your palette with the blue and the white. It's a little bit too much white than we need right now, but we'll be using that later anyway. So take your blue and white and mix about equal parts of both of those colors on your palette. So you'll get an even lighter blue. And we are going to create kind of a simple textured sky. I will say the more textured you are with this, it'll look really pretty in the end. I'm going to make this canyon edge a little bit darker so you can see what I'm doing here. So I want my sky to be a little bit darker at the top, and I'm going to add a little bit more white into my blue, especially around the canyons. And that is really going to give you some pretty contrast with your canyons later. The dark red against the light blue, it's going to create some gorgeous contrast. So as you're painting this in, you're just doing these kind of textured paint strokes, and I'm going around my canyon. I don't want to paint over those lines, and I want to be really careful with my pencil so I'm not dragging the graphite pencil into my paint. So these are very short, kind of dabby type of paint strokes, and we want our sky to be lighter towards the bottom and lighter around the canyon. And we want our sky to be darker at the very top. And by darker, I just mean that you're using more blue and not mixing the white with the blue at the top. So right here, we can make our paint strokes go vertically to go between the canyons. So that's a very light color down here. You can really use the edge of your brush to outline the edge of your canyon. And if you have to paint over your drawing a little bit, that's fine. Just try not to smear too much of your pencil line. These narrow canyons, I just did the top parts flat. So when the sky blues and when the sky dries and we paint the canyons, we can paint over our blue very easily because it's a light color. And I'm going to get a little bit more of this blue not mixed with white and just texture this up at the top. It kind of looks like the sky has some high clouds in it with that white blending with the blue. I'm going to paint the water next, and this is only going to be the first layer for our water, and we're not worried about reflections or where any of that's going to go right now. We just want to do a layer of light blue in the lake or the creek. So this is the 3/4 flat and the light blue permanent, and I'm going to start at the bottom, but leave that space open where we drew that line at the bottom where that land is. I'm thinning this down a little bit with water because I want this to be a very thin layer of paint. That's why I'm dipping little bits of water in my brush. So our water is actually a little bit lighter as it approaches the horizon line. So this part down here is more of the light blue permanent. And then as we go up, we want to grab some white and we want to blend that white so it gets lighter and lighter as we reach the bottom of that canyon. So you want to stop at the horizon line because that horizon line is actually where the bank of the water is, the bottom of the canyon, where that tree line is going to be on top of. So there's no water above that line. And just blend this gently, full width brush, left and right strokes. I'm just adding white on there, letting that blend with the blue. And if there's streaks of color in there, that's okay. Streaks of blue that look darker in some areas and lighter in other areas, that's okay. So we have a nice thin layer of light blue. And just for fun, I'm going to grab more of that light blue and kind of add some more textured strokes up here. Maybe blend a few white strokes in there without mixing it all the way. Gives it some more texture. And this step is done. Let's wait for our sky to dry a little bit and then let's do our canyons. So this is red oxide and yellow oxide. We'll also need, we'll be using the titanium white, so I have plenty of white on my palette still, and we'll be using Mars black as well. I am going to paint the dark shadowy parts of the canyon first. So if we look at our reference photo, we can observe different shadows in the canyon, and they're all on the left side where the sun is not hitting the canyon in this picture. So it's shadowy on the left, and also the parts of the canyon where we drew like vertical lines, there's dark shadow parts on those left sides as well. We're going to be very abstract and loose with this. And I'm going to start with red oxide and I'm going to mix a little bit of black into that. So that's going to darken this red to a very, very dark red color. So this is the number 12 bright brush. I'm going to use the end of the brush to start on this left canyon. And I'm going to mix more of that color. So red oxide and black. And I'm just very loosely outlining the far left edge of this rock formation. So I went up about to that point, and then I'm going to take more red oxide and black and kind of outline a little bit on the top. Actually, I'm going to outline the entire top and go down. So I just have the top and the side outline with this dark red, and right here I'm going to take my brush full width and kind of drag some vertical strokes up. And then I'm going to outline this part that's now going vertical and it has shadows right here. So this is the far left part of this rock. I'm going to give more dark into that part. So we're doing this very loosely. If it helps, you can get your reference photo and really observe those shadows, the dark part. We are kind of changing the picture a bit, but we're going to do this one right here. So there's like a shadowy area right here. And then I can use the edge of my brush to kind of define the top part of that rock. And then there's another shadowy area on the left side of this rock pillar. Kind of goes vertical up. And then this large part of Cathedral Rock. We're going to do, again, shadow color. So shadow color is the red oxide mixed with black. When you reload your brush, you don't have to grab the same amount of red and black. So sometimes I like to change it up a little bit. When I reload, I'll grab a different amount of black and red, or I'll just load it into black one time and then load it into just the red oxide another time, just to give some fun variation in that color. I'm doing these vertical parts of this rock. They kind of spread out a little bit towards the bottom. But notice how I'm leaving a big area on the bottom of these rock formations blank, because that's where our trees are going to be. So then we have our shadows kind of laid in here. I'm going to add some more shadows with this one. I'm going to wipe my brush, and now I'm going to start adding some lighter color in here. So this is just red oxide, and I'm not loading it in any other color right now. So I'm doing my next layer of color, and I'm actually taking these and going horizontally. So a lot of the canyon we have colors are going horizontally. So I'm taking my paintbrush and I'm dragging this red oxide so that the black, that dark color, is still wet enough to where it's blending with this red oxide. So I'm kind of dragging it with it. So taking this one's going to go more vertical, but then I can kind of do a few horizontal strokes in there. These smaller rock pillars, the narrow ones, we can just drag our brush vertically. There's not a lot of space to do the horizontal strokes in there, so I can use my brush this way and just do vertical paint strokes and drag that vertically down, and then we can get to the bottom and kind of sweep it to the right. And then right here, horizontal strokes, dragging that dark color with it, and then kind of swooping it down. I'm leaving a space on the bottom open, not painted yet. This one right here, taking that dark color, dragging it to the right, and leaving space on the far right. That's where we're going to add some lighter color in there. This one just kind of goes off the canvas and then kind of swoops down. This one we can kind of outline the edge of the canyon and blend with your dark. If your dark part ended up drying and it wasn't blending with your red oxide, that's okay. We can always go back and add dark later and blend that some more. Without rinsing your brush, mix red oxide with your yellow oxide. So this is going to be our next level of color, and it's lighter, and we're introducing yellow into our rock formation. So where we left those white blank spots, we're going to take that yellow oxide and red color and start adding that in there. And same kind of thing of doing kind of a mix of horizontal strokes, but also we have whatever's left over. We just want to kind of fill the rest of that in. And it is blending with that red oxide color that's right next to it. And outline and just fill it in. These ones just starting to kind of maybe go down at different angles. So vertical and then kind of goes to the right. We're just filling it in. I'm still leaving a gap on the bottom of these rocks, a blank white canvas, because I'm going to add trees there. So I'm not going to bring it all the way down. So let's see this smaller pillar. We're going to take that, maybe go up like a triangle a little bit, and then blend this down. Maybe do a few horizontal marks in that one. We kind of lost our shadow, but we can go back and add more shadow later. And then I'm going to add, we didn't really leave a lot of blank space on that other narrow pillar, but I can add yellow into there. This one, we have a bunch of white space we want to fill up, so taking yellow and red again, filling those areas in. It's okay if it blends with your red. We kind of want it to do that. And here as well. And that time I actually loaded my brush with a little bit more red mixed with yellow, just for fun color variation. So this bottom, I'm actually going to make the bottom of my canyon dark. So I'm mixing all the colors together with black, a little bit of black. And I'm just taking this, so again, this is red oxide, yellow oxide with a little bit of black. And I'm just kind of dabbing this dark color on the base of these rocks, kind of dragging it down, kind of downwards horizontally to the right. But that's just making the bottom part dark and shadowy for a nice base layer for our greenery that's going to be growing on the bottom. Then I want to go back and add some more defined shadowy. So without rinsing the brush, I'm going to grab some of my pure black color and use just the edge of my brush to just go back and go over my shadow lines. These are the far edges of our rocks on the left, and maybe lightly drag some of that dark color towards the right. So any of these, I'm just going down and adding more shadow into these rocks. So a little bit more water on my brush, taking that black and actually mixing a little bit more of the red oxide with the black. So it's not pure black, it's really dark, that really dark brown that we started out with. And going back on the edges of some of the rocks and really defining the edge of the lines. And I'm going to completely rinse my brush off next. I am going to add my lightest color to my canyon next. So I'm going to take my 12 bright brush and I'm going to mix white with yellow oxide. So it becomes a light version of that color. And I'm going to add these light colors, but this is only going to be on the right side of our canyons where that light is hitting. And I'm going to start on this one, and I'm going to try to experiment with this. We're trying to be very loose and kind of expressive with these canyons, and I want to try to bring out those horizontal color variations that we see in the canyons, the layers, and I'm doing that by dragging my brush very lightly using the full width of the brush and kind of dry brush style. So I'm not applying a lot of paint while doing this. I'm holding it very lightly and just letting it barely kind of touch the surface of the canvas and do horizontal dry brush strokes. This narrow rock I did more vertical than horizontal, so we can do a little bit of vertical and a few little horizontal, but just a little bit is enough to highlight these Sedona rocks. We can take some of these horizontal marks and it's okay to go over some of the dark areas. So like on this one, we can have fun and have some that really do overlap some of the dark shadow areas. We don't want to overpower with too much of this light yellow color. It's just enough to give it some highlight. I'm going to add a few more over here. So dry brush, horizontal marks. I'm going to try getting my dark color again. And I'm going to add another layer on this canyon. So I'm going to start with my shadow again and do like a little triangular shadow area. So now I have another layer, more dimension in this rock formation. I'm going to do a few, I like how that looks, adding a few vertical lines on my rocks. And that is it for the first part of our rock formation. We have it all our darks and lights in. We can always go back and add more shadowing and more highlighting and render it further. But I'm going to move along to the next step, which is going to involve adding reflection in the water. So we're going to be very basic about this because the canyons were hard enough. If we have to paint the exact same thing again in the water, it might be kind of hard. So we're going to simplify this, but still make it look beautiful, like the canyons are reflecting in the water, because that's the point of having it by the creek in this painting. So I'm going to use my 3/4 wash brush for this, and I'm going to let's get some more red oxide onto our canvas, because that's the main color for our canyon, this beautiful red oxide color. I'm going to load my brush in just that color for now, and I'm going to do a reflection where I'm basically just dragging my brush down in a vertical direction. So you don't want a lot of paint on your brush, and it needs to be kind of thin. So maybe add a little bit of water to it if it's not doing this. And when you stroke down, you want to kind of mimic the shape of the canyon, but it doesn't have to be defined at all. So longer strokes where the higher part of the canyon is, and shorter strokes where it's shorter. But as you stroke down, you want to quickly release the pressure of the brush so that your color just kind of fades away. So you're stroking down and you're releasing the pressure. You're picking your brush up really quickly after you stroke downwards. And just for fun, I want to add some of those darks into the reflection as well. So I took my red oxide and I mixed a teeny bit of black to it. So now it's that really dark color that we used in the dark shadowy parts of our rocks. And I'm going to take that and add that in my reflection as well. So I'm adding the dark color mostly in the area that's closest to the edge of the horizon line. So dark color is towards the top, and then it kind of disappears quicker, and so it's shorter than the red strokes, if that makes sense. So the darker is all up here. It gives your reflection a little bit more depth, and we have dark and light in our reflection without having to work too hard for it. I'll drag it down just a little bit further, or kind of blend it a little bit more with our red. Then, without rinsing the brush, I'm going to take my red oxide, add a little bit of black to it. So this is very dark. And this is that land area on the bottom where we're going to paint our yucca plant and prickly pear cactus later. Just add some fun elements to our painting. We could even take some of our yellow oxide and blend that with it. I just want this ground area, I want to fill it in, and it's got to be mostly dark. We can highlight it later. But if we want to play around with the yellow oxide and kind of blend that with the red oxide and little bits of black, that's fine. We just want to make sure everything on that bottom is filled in, and the edge of that land is wavy and uneven. So this is overlapping our creek. Take a little bit more black. Add some more black at the bottom of here. Next, let's rinse that brush off, and we're going to introduce our green in this landscape painting. I love the contrast of the greenery against the red rocks. And so this is Hooker's Green Hue. I'm going to get this brush all rinsed off and set to the side. I'm going to switch to my number 12 bright brush. So that's that smaller flat brush that we used earlier when we did the rocks. I'm going to load this in. Let's start with just green and nothing else. And we have our tree line that's kind of hugging the bottom of our rock formations and just above our water area. So I'm going to start over here on the left, and I'm just going to kind of dab the end of my brush to form the tops of these trees. These are far away, so they can be very abstract. We can just stamp our brush to form different layers, these trees. You're going to find, because we left this area white, the bottom part's going to look light and then the top part's going to look dark when it's overlapping the bottom of our rocks, and that's okay. We can deal with that. So we can take this, maybe just fill it in, going left and right. That's where that edge of that creek is. And then we want different levels in these trees. So some might be going higher and overlap our canyon more. Some might be going lower. We don't want any blank canvas left, so we do want to make sure we cover up all that white. Before this layer of green dries, I want to highlight these trees a little bit. So without rinsing the brush, I'm going to grab a little bit of white on my brush. So I have white and green on my brush. This is going to create a lighter layer. So I'm just using the end of my paintbrush to dab the tops of these trees, and that is adding a light green layer. It's really helping the edge of those trees to stand out so we can see them. See where the tree stops and where the rock is. And maybe the light is hitting the top of the trees so that they're lighter. So same thing over here, defining the treetops, curvy shapes, very abstract. You have variation of heights. I can even add some green into our rocks. Let's look back at the photo of Cathedral Rock, Sedona, and I'm going to zoom in so you can see there's green growing up on the base of the rock pillars. And so we can mimic that in our painting as well. So adding green against red, it's really pretty in landscape paintings because green and red are contrasting colors. So the green, it just makes it stand out and pop a little bit better. So I'm just adding little dabs of green, kind of going diagonally down where the shadows are towards the bottom of those rocks. I'm not going to make it go all the way to the top, just towards the bottom. And then I decided to play around with this a little bit further, and you don't have to do this. Maybe this is a little bit more advanced, but I'm going to take my yellow oxide on my 12 bright brush and mix it with the green. I still have a little bit of white on my brush too. So yellow oxide, white, and green. I want to introduce more of a yellow green into these trees. So just a little bit on the edges. Later on, I'll add some more primary yellow into this, but I'm going to kind of just leave that alone for now actually. And I want to do the bottom of this dark. So I have green with a little bit of black to darken this green up, and I just kind of outline the bottom part of those trees. That's pretty much right where that horizon line is, just so it's a really dark horizontal line, and then a little bit of green reflection in the water as well. So this reflection is the same exact technique that we used, only we're doing this with the 12 bright brush, and it's the green and black. So I'm just dragging a little bit of dark green downwards to give the water some dark green reflection. We want all of our reflection to be dry before doing this next step because we're going to add a layer to our water that's going to be darker and it's going to be overlapping a lot of a reflection. So this is the color Primary Blue, which is a darker blue than what we were using earlier. And we will be using the 3/4 inch flat wash brush. That's the big flat brush. Start by loading your brush in the blue. And let's mix light blue permanent with primary blue so it's not super dark, kind of a medium blue. Now let's start at the bottom, and I'm going to use the end of my brush to paint left and right paint strokes. So these are the water texture lines in our Oak Creek. And these ones are longer, wider, and bigger because they're up close. And as we paint them going further back, we want our lines to start getting thinner and lighter and smaller. So as we get back here, we want to make these lines. Now they're overlapping our reflection that we did earlier. I'm leaving a lot of space and gap between the lines. I'm not trying to cover up all of that first layer of paint we did with that light blue early on in the painting. But when we paint these lines over our reflection, it creates the illusion of reflecting water without making it too complicated to try to paint. So back here, these lines are so thin and close together because they're far away. So I'm using the end of my brush to create those thin lines. And they're shorter, they're not as wide as the lines towards the bottom. And I don't want to cover everything up. So I'm using a lot of that light blue and not the dark blue right now. Very thin horizontal lines that are overlapping that reflection layer that we did. And then as we go down, the lines become bigger, wider, kind of more spread apart. Back here, they're thinner and closer together. So it's almost like you're kind of rocking your paintbrush left and right to create the movement in the water. I'm going to take more of this dark blue and add some dark blue towards the bottom. There might be a few strokes where I'm using maybe more of the full width of the brush so they're thicker. And if I accidentally paint over the brown land area on the bottom, that's okay. I can go back and touch that up later. But I want my water to be darker towards the bottom. So I'm just going to add some more of that dark blue at the bottom. I'm going to wipe my brush and use titanium white right now. So I'm going to make sure my bristles are flat still, but take my white and maybe even mix, or if you want, mix a little bit of light blue in there so it's not super bright and overpowering, but I want to just do a few little light lines back here with the white to get some more lighter color water lines. If you like the simplicity of the water and you don't want to keep going and rendering it further, you don't have to do this. Remember, these lines are further away, so they are closer together and thinner, and they don't go as wide. And then as you go down, the lines are a little bit thicker and wider. This is how we can create depth in our water, by altering all of these horizontal line strokes. Just doing a few more kind of lighter color in there, letting it sort of blend with that blue a little bit, but I don't want to overdo it because we still have our light layer that we did at first. We don't want to cover all of that first layer up. We still want to see it. It's for the most part gone way back here where all that dark reflection is. But when we add these lighter lines over those dark reflections, it still makes it look like there's water over there. I'm going to get my red oxide now, and maybe we can do some horizontal marks with the red just for fun. Even though we did reflection earlier going vertically, I'm just going to do a few little horizontal marks with the red. Just to add a few more pops of color in my blue water area. Maybe there's a few down here. They're kind of off on their own, but still by where we did the reflection. And then I can go back down here and touch up the bottom part of our land area. So still using the 3/4 flat, I'm going to get my red oxide again and just really go back and define any areas where I painted blue over so that this land is in front of our water. And just for fun, also optional, but for fun, we can add some shadowing into this. Maybe kind of mimic what we did with the rocks where we did the black lines. I'm going to do like some diagonal areas of black and just kind of drag it in so we have different layers in our ground area or different shadowing. Can even take our white and kind of highlight the top part, kind of drag it down. And if you wanted to simplify this and just have it be one color, you can do it that way as well. I'm going to do another optional advanced step, and that involves highlighting the canyons a little bit further, and this time I'm using the angle brush. This is the 3/8 inch angle brush, and I'm just kind of experimenting with how this works with the edges of our rocks. So only highlighting the far edge of it, and I'm just kind of dragging it a little bit over some of the other red oxide color. And this is our brightest layer, so it's brighter than that other highlight layer that we did earlier. Only on the far right edges do we do this. We want to leave the shadow alone. We don't want to really paint over any of the shadow part. So maybe there's a few horizontal marks. So that actually looks really pretty when it overlapped the shadow just a little bit without taking over the shadow. I'm doing it a few kind of vertical marks on these thinner rock pillars. And we get some more yellow oxide and white. And highlight this part. We just don't want to overdo it. There is a mix of vertical strokes in there too. When we do kind of a mix of vertical and horizontal, it gives us some pretty variation in the direction of our paint strokes. Kind of makes it look a little bit more expressive. Do a few more horizontal lines. Maybe over here, overlapping parts of the dark. maybe there's some brightness down here. I am going to next paint tree branches in our greenery that we painted earlier on the bottom of our rocks. And this is the number 8 long round brush. It's got a very fine tip to it. If you don't have a long round, you can use any tiny detail brush. You can even do this with a Sharpie or a paint pen. And you're just painting little branches on the bottom part of your trees. So it gives them a little bit more definition. If you're simplifying this painting, you can actually skip this step if you're not really fond of painting thin lines or tree branches. So just doing this very loosely. These are far away, so it's still rather abstract, but we can do vertical lines for the trunk and then little diagonal lines between and the tops of the trees. The next thing we're going to do is draw the prickly pear cactus and paint a white layer of that shape in, as well as the yucca plant that's going to be on the left of it. So I'm going to get a piece of chalk, and you want to make sure everything is dry before you draw this in. So all this area right here is dry. I'm going to do a cactus plant in the lower left corner. So it's going to be like a little balloon oval shape. So the oval goes to a point at the end of each of the little arms of the cactus, and you can change the shape up if you want. So you can make more little arms or less. So I just did one main one and then 3 little ones. And I'm not going to draw the yucca plant in, but if you want to, you can draw that in with chalk. And then I'm going to paint all of this white first and let the white dry and then do my color over it, just because I want this to really stand out and be nice and opaque against kind of the darker blue background that I created in this area. So I'm taking titanium white and a number 4 round brush, and I'm just filling in that shape. If you have to adjust your chalk drawing, that's okay. The chalk will erase when everything is done, so you don't have to fill in your chalk completely, or you can go outside the lines if you need to. This gives us the opportunity to really define our prickly pear cactus shape. For the yucca plant, that's the deserty shrub on the left that's going to have the pretty yellow flowers coming out of it. I'm going to switch to the 8 round brush but still use titanium white to block in the shape of this plant. So I'm using this one because I like to use this when I do leaves. So we could either start out small and then press down and you get your leaf gets larger, or you can do it the opposite way. You can press hard and then release the pressure. You want to just create an area of pointed grass-like shapes, kind of curving outwards, forming the base of that plant. And then when all this white dries, we'll do green over it. Do a few more smaller pieces in there. And we want to wait for all of this to dry before going on to the next step. I'm going to get some fresh Hooker's Green Hue on my paint palette and use the number 4 round brush. We can mix our green with our yellow oxide and white to get some really pretty variations in this. But as you're painting this cactus, you want to make sure your paint strokes are kind of going rounded in the direction. So these strokes are curving this way, and then it would be the opposite on the other side. And I am just playing around with the yellow oxide, the white, and the green, and just letting that kind of blend on the canvas. We can have maybe this side of the cactus will be darker and the other side lighter, or vice versa. So fill in all of that shape. Now I'm going to grab some white on my brush without rinsing and then just kind of blend this in curved strokes so you get that really pretty shiny look. It also brightens that color up because it is against kind of a darker background, so the lighter might help it to stand out better. So white and green fill in all the little parts. So this little piece of the prickly pear. Then I'm going to switch back to my number 8 round brush. So that's the brush that I used for the white in the yucca plant. And I'm basically just going to paint over all of my white grass type of leaf paint strokes I did earlier. And if it's not covering all the white completely, that's okay. So just taking my green, you can play around with your green and add yellow oxide into it or white if you need to. You can even add black into it if you want it to have some darker areas. Get some more yellow oxide. Kind of loosen it a little bit with water because these are such thin paint strokes, and maybe add some white into that. Twist the brush. That helps get that paint right there on the end of the bristles. And then just creating some new leaf strokes that I didn't paint earlier with white, just adding more to it. I'm going to add a little bit more dark in here. So I'm going to take some of my black, little tiny bit of black, and mix that with your green. So now we have some darker colors, and I'm just going to add some darker shadowy pieces on the bottom. And then I'm going to paint the fruit of our prickly pear cactus. This is Quinacridone Magenta, the first time this shows up in the painting, and titanium white. So we should have painted these white first, but that's okay. So we're just going to do little oval shapes on the ends of the main parts of the cactus. So these are going to be the little magenta fruits. I'm going to do 2 on this one. They're just little ovals. And if you want, you can even have them overlap a little bit on the cactus. I'll do 2 on this one. You can add more if you want. And then maybe there's one right here. So when that white dries, then we could paint over it with magenta. And then I'm going to I'm going to paint the stem of the yucca. So I'm going to take, this is the number 4 round brush, and green and black, just to make a really dark green stem color. So we're going to do a few stems, and you can do this with the 8 round too if that makes more sense, because it's a thin line. I'm going to do several little stems, and this is going to, at the end of these stems, we're going to have the little yellow flowers for the yucca. You could do maybe a 4th one, but it's not as high as the other 3. Let's get everything to dry before adding more detail to our prickly pear and yucca plant. I'm going to go ahead and dry all of this really quick. And then I'm going to introduce the color Primary Yellow to my paint palette. So this is the first time Primary Yellow is showing up. This is going to create a really pretty bright yellow for our yucca plant. And I'm going to use a number 4 round brush, and actually I'm going to add little dabs of yellow to some of the tops of the trees. Just give it an extra pop of color back there, since we did that earlier with the yellow oxide. But now I'm adding a very light layer of yellow to the top diagonal parts or the top edges of the trees. And then for the yucca flower, we can take yellow and white and do little tiny paint strokes that are kind of going diagonally up. And this is very similar to painting lavender or lupine, where you just do little dotted paint strokes on the ends of a tall stem. It's kind of the same concept. You start at the bottom and then you do little tiny strokes going upwards, and it makes like a little point at the top. When you load your brush in different amounts of yellow and white, that white really helps that yellow to become bright and be super opaque against a darker background. So make sure you're doing yellow and white for that. I'm going to do another lighter layer of leaves in front of my darker stems, so to make it look like there's some leaves overlapping the front of the stems. So I'm going to switch back to my number 8 long round brush. So I'm going to get my green, mix some yellow oxide into it, mix some white just so it's lighter, and then add this layer so that these are just kind of overlapping my darker stems. And then I want to get some yellow oxide, and back to my number 4 round brush, and just add some of that to the bottom of my flowers just to give it some dark into that little boost of contrast into those flowers. When my prickly pears are dry, so when that white layer is dry, then I can take my number 4 round brush and start painting those in. So this is just solid Quinacridone Magenta, and all I'm doing is painting over that white layer, that white oval that I painted earlier. And then without rinsing the brush, grab some white and do a little tiny white kind of oval stroke on the top of each of your little fruits for the opening of the fruit, I'm going to rinse, and I'm going to start doing the little black dots and the spikes on our cactus. So to do the spikes, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to paint little black dots. I thought about grabbing a toothpick, and you can if you like to use the toothpick, and using that to create the little dots, but this time I'm just going to use the number 8 long round brush and use the very end tip of that brush to do little dots. So we need some Mars Black, and all you're doing is painting little dots on the arms of the prickly pear cactus. So just all randomly scattered throughout. They don't have to be equally spaced apart. I'm going to do this on the large main part of the cactus as well. Just for fun and added contrast, I'm going to do a little bit of outlining. I'm going to outline this part using the 8 round and black, just kind of outline the edge of that. And when I outline, I don't like to outline everything, just parts of it. Gives it a little boost of definition with that shape, especially since we have dark green against a dark blue background, so it kind of helps it to stand out better. And then the prickly fruit also gets little black dots. Something else I like to do if I need to help something to stand out a little bit better is, instead of outlining, maybe I'll also do a little bit of highlighting. So this is kind of tricky because we just did black dots and I don't want it to smear with any of those black dots. So we could wait till it dries, or we can just be extra careful. So I'm going to take my green and white and yellow, just make a lighter version of that green. So green, white, and primary yellow. And then do like a little curved highlight on some of the edging. Maybe even in the middle of some of it, but without trying to smear any of the black dots. Just be really careful. And then while our little black dots are drying, I'm just going to add some fun yellow oxide highlight to our red ground area over here. So just on the kind of top right part of that, I'm taking some yellow oxide, just kind of painting the edges of it. And then when our little black dots on the cactus dry, we can take our number 8 long round brush. You can also do this with a white paint pen, but I'm going to use the end of the bristles and grab titanium white, and I'm just going to do little cactus spikes in like little clusters of 2s or 3s coming out from all of the little black dots. It's helpful to kind of twist your brush, and if you need to, water down your white too to help really get those paint strokes to be very thin and pointy. That could help too. You're just using the end of the bristles, and I'm just making all of my spikes fun and super long. You don't have to do yours this long if you don't want to. And they're just kind of coming out from all the little dots. You don't even have to do spikes on all the dots. You can skip some of the dots. And the fruit does not get any of the spikes. We are now in the final touch-ups of this painting, and I'm going to go back on the edge of this land right here. This is the 8 round brush and Mars Black, and I'm just kind of dabbing this dark line pretty much where that horizon line is, just to kind of differentiate where the bottom of our tree shrubbery area is and where our water begins. And it doesn't have to be perfectly straight. The edge of the creek is not perfectly straight, so we don't need to do that. And let's see some other things that we can do. I like this yellow, so I'm going to take maybe some primary yellow and yellow oxide and white. Just do a little pop of brightness on the edge of this land over here. And then one other final touch up I did off camera was I added one line on this narrow part right here. So like a black line right down the middle. And if you want, you can do another black line down the middle of your other narrow canyon. And then this painting actually looks really good when you paint the sides black. So I did that. I did Mars Black on the edges of the canvas. And that is it. This is the conclusion of how to paint Cathedral Rock, Sedona. Hope you enjoyed this one. Thanks for watching, and thanks for painting with me.